Wonderful. So is this four? Is this our fourth show and tell?
Yep.
How time flies when we're all having fun together. And if you've missed out any of the other ones, they are all on YouTube, so you can take a look. And we'll be posting various different links. But I don't have a huge amount to say, so I'm going to hand over to Harry and Tom.
Ace. All right. Uh,
Just you wait, Lee. You'll see how we beat last week's.
I don't think we did that good. I don't think, personally we did that good of a job last week. So I'm glad people enjoyed it. So just going to share the screen. All right. Are you recording, Ross?
Yeah, it's already started.
All right, great. So welcome to the fourth show and tell for the mapping services work in crisis response response. As ever, just going to sort of just cover off who's in our immediate team. So there's Ross, who's in charge of planning and internal stakeholder engagement, or senior stakeholder engagement. There's myself, Harry, who I do a lot of the design and research work. And then we've got Tom, who does a lot of frontline engagement, is doing a lot of making sure we're getting around everyone to get your input on what we're working on. So as before, this is a conversation. We don't want to be too broadcasty about it. Feel free to ask questions or make comments over video or in the chat, and we'll make sure we'll cover back over them. So just to recap, because it's useful, this show and tells every Thursday. Let Ross, Tom, or myself know if you want an invite forwarded to anyone. Our working document or living document of what we're working on is out in the open. We can forward that link on to people who are interested in it, as well as our plan of what things we're up to. And we're blogging about what we're learning and the progress we're making. Tom did a great blog last week that we published. So just to sort of reiterate why we're doing this work. So mapping services can help us confirm what user needs we meet now. So it's not it probably won't be news to everyone what it is, but it's really just kind of confirming, get some shared language about it. Identify common tools we need to deliver current and future services. And really the whole point of this exercise is to decide where to focus efforts of service design and tech. And as this designer called Ben Holiday says, understanding your services is sort of the first step towards improving and transforming them. So insights so far. So Tom, do you want me to, I think you're doing this next bit, so I can just press.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Hand over to me. If you just bring up the names of the people we've chatted with. So this week kicked off our interviews. So from Monday, we've been speaking to people from our external partners, so people from the council, with the ambition of getting people from the fire service and other councils. And there's another partner we're going to speak to someone from, but they've slipped my mind. A lot of this week, we've interviewed internal staff, so people from the frontline team. And we're just excited to share some insight we've gained from that, because it's that insight and material that is very quickly changing the look of the live document we've shared with you previously. In fact, because we've been doing about 2 to 3 interviews a day, when we do get to chuck in the material on the map and kind of process what we've been learning, the information's changing really rapidly. So it's going to be nice to share the document with you again and basically see it in a completely different form. But what we're going to do now is progress with some examples of insights we've gotten from people. So I think the next slide should hopefully be a quote. So on Monday, we spoke with someone called Rosalind, who was an emergency planning manager at Doncaster Council. And colleagues might be aware that last year we had a really big role to play in the floods that hit part of South Yorkshire, but specifically Doncaster, and specifically places like Fishlake, which was in the media a lot. And we had an incredibly embedded role. And that was because of the relationship we've got with specifically Rosalind, the emergency planning manager. And so, which just made her an absolutely perfect person to chat about. And we asked her some questions about what the council do, what their priorities are, what they need to keep in mind when they're responding to incidents of this. But we also asked why they turn to places like organisations like the Red Cross, and why in such a, I don't want to use inappropriate language, but we was the first person they turned to, the first organisation they turned to get support. And a really interesting quote we got, I just need to move people's faces, was, "I've got lots of trained staff. The Red Cross brings something different." And that was in relation to talking about why they asked for us. And an organisation like Doncaster Council is huge. And Rosalind was basically saying that they've got the staff to cover rest centres. They've got trained rest centre managers, but they turn to us because we bring a calmness. And I know it's banged on about a lot, but it will be how we're recognised internationally. Our neutrality shines through in our marketing materials and our responses, not just in the UK, but internationally. And the council really appreciate that element we bring. They appreciate the fact that we're not a council face, we're an alternative organisation, and people view us differently and interact with us differently because of that. They call upon us because of our connections, and that is relating to the fact that in some areas, our ER teams will represent not just a Red Cross response, but they'll represent a voluntary response as well, which is sometimes referred to as local voluntary sectors. So think groups like Samaritans, Yorkshire 4x4. We will often deploy them on behalf of a voluntary response to an incident. So the council really, really values that we can call in those people as well. And then there's the emotional support side. And that kind of links into the calmness we bring, but more specifically, it was referring to the fact that we not only bring emotional support to service users, but to people like the council as well, the emergency planning team, we can offer emotional support to that team as well. And then that's something that they really, really value, because it's a pleasant change from, I can't remember the wording she used, but the strict internal procedures they had in place within civil service and local government. And if you just jump it over to the next slide, please, Harry, I'm going to try and link it nicely. And I really liked that insight, because that calmness, connections, and the emotional support are very hard things to define. They're very humanitarian things, but they're incredibly hard, abstract ideas to translate into services. And I do think it's important that we keep in mind that all those things Rosalind was talking about when we asked her why she turns to the Red Cross, our services we offer, they're utilising us because they're getting that from us, and it's supportive. And just want to stress again that they do have the staff to support rest centres and the response, but they still turn to us. And I really thought that was a good example of a bit of positive feedback. So a pat on the back for us, and also good insight from a mapping perspective as well. I'll just pause there, because it'd be interesting to hear from any other ER colleagues if they've got similar relationships or can recognise something similar in other areas. No worries if not, I just want to keep it open for conversation's sake. I'll take a golden silence as no, and then I'll jump over to the next slide. You're muted, Harry.
So this next bit, so what we've seen from the interviews and chats we've had so far is like there's a real appetite to actually define what we actually do. This, like that, everyone's been sort of saying to that, like at the end of every conversation with people in different teams, I was just really pleased we're finally doing this, and like putting it into like plain language what we do. This was actually a call just before this show and tell with David, who's the sort of senior emergency response officer in Cumbria, and yeah, he said, "Is this something?" He said because everyone's been so busy with a lot of emergencies that keep happening. It's just like something he just wish we'd finally get down to, and he's really enjoyed the sort of proactive nature of what we're doing. So that's been really nice to know that we're kind of onto the right track. That this is something lots of us want. Also, I don't, this is maybe people being polite. I don't know, but people kind of like saying this in a kind of unsolicited way after towards the end of the interviews, and so that's. That feels quite encouraging, actually. Do you want to do the next one, Tom?
Yeah, sure. I'll just add on that previous point as well. I think it can sound quite odd that we're trying to define what it is we actually do, because it seems like hidden within there is the element that we don't know what we do. And that can seem like a silly thing to ask ourselves at times, but I don't think it is. I think it's a really important question to ask of ourselves, especially when a lot of the services we offer are incredibly nuanced and can vary across region and team to team. So yeah, is that the next slide?
No, next one. There you go.
Great. And that, yeah, so I know within workforce, sometimes we can think that different regions do things completely differently. Even if we're the same directorate, how things are done in so-and-so doesn't reflect how it's done here. But an interesting observation we're making is that from a service user perspective, it looks exactly the same. At the end of the day, a service is still going to look like a volunteer showing up somewhere and providing either emotional support or practical support. At the end of the day, it's still going to look like a local authority or a category 1 or 2 responder, one in Red Cross support, and it will look incredibly similar from region to region. It's just perhaps the manner in which they're triggered or activated can look different from region to region. And that's something I hear about a lot. And I just think it's a nice pattern to recognize that it looks the same. I'll pause there again in case anyone wants to chirp in on that, if they've recognized that as well.
Yeah, because this was just kind of the observation that while there's variations from place to place on how we deliver these services, the outcome's still the same for the end users, which is quite encouraging, because I guess there's always, like in any sort of exercise like this, there was like a worry of like, it'd be so disparately different that it'd be hard to actually map it. But it seems like everyone's kind of agreeing when we're talking to people one-on-one.
I use a little bit of ER terminology there, but for example, just because CRCC is active in one area doesn't necessarily mean that the area in which it's not active, service users aren't getting the same response, because they absolutely are. Volunteers are still being deployed, and the heart of the service and the heart of why we offer the services is still working and in action. It can just look a little bit different.
Rachel, you just made a comment. Do you want to sort of repeat it on the video?
Oh,
Putting the spotlight on you.
All right. No, I just said that it's really good to hear, because we do have that quite a lot. We have the kind of battle between trying to get consistency across all 4 nations and across the country as well, in ER. But that can be really difficult, as things look really, really different in the middle of London to they do in the Hebrides. I think I've said that so many times, so sorry for everyone on the call. But I've always felt that actually on the ground, what we're providing is the same thing, and it's really flexible and dynamic. And I think that's one of the real key benefits of the service. So it's really nice to hear that you're actually backing that up. So thank you.
It's certainly a pattern we're picking up on. I mean, I think the chat we've had about Cumbria earlier today is a perfect example of that. That's a geographical location that looks nothing like other regions we've got. And so the practicalities of how that support is deployed looks completely different from what I'm used to in my substantive role and to what colleagues will be used to in their roles as EROs or crisis response, part of the crisis response team. Consistency is an incredibly hard thing to do and achieve, and that's okay, as long as at the end of the day the results and the service we're providing look similar to those that need it.
So I'm just thinking of time, so I'm going to move this on to the next
Okay.
point. That's cool. Okay. don't know what's done that. But one of the things that's come out a lot this week is actually these services that aren't about responding, that are about planning, and actually that we're involved in a huge range of planning with lots of different organisations, be it flood resilience groups in Cumbria or airports in the south, like of England. Like there seems to be it seems obvious now that we've written it down, but there seems to be, certainly from the perspective of like other organisations, that they get us involved in planning for different emergencies. And while we aren't doing all of, let's say, for example, planning for a flood, we're really involved in that in lots of different ways in different areas. So that's kind of been like a obvious now we've written it down, but it was something we'd missed out until like this week. Do you want to do this one, Tom?
Yeah. This insight was gained not only from internal conversations, but with external partners as well. I think it's important to consider because a big part of what we do is getting to rest centres. You can tell I'm conscious of time, my pace has suddenly jumped, hasn't it? But the observation is that rest centres look incredibly different than they used to, and that the model in which they used to operate is looking incredibly different as well. And I think that can vary from major incident to major incident. And I think a statistic that was thrown out there was, as a rule of thumb, about 10% of people come to rest centres. I don't know if that was someone agreeing in applause or something else, but yeah, and that's just an interesting insight to keep in mind because we have a big role to play in them. Rest centres historically used to be big places where people would have to stay overnight. They still do sometimes, but what we're hearing is that that's not as common as it used to be. And therefore, as a service provider, that affects us because that's way less intensive if we're not staffing them 24/7. And it changes contingency plans and ideas of what a response will look like when we're involved in the planning or mitigation stages of working with our external partners in LRFs or EPGs. If you're in Northern Ireland, I learned that this week. They're the same thing, just different emergency planning group. We can jump on to the next one from that if anyone has got.
I think it might have been maybe like Neil in the Belfast office was telling us that like 95 what they do is fires, and looking at some of the data that Anna Swan shared with us around calls to the crisis response call centre, like 60% of it is fires. But then it's interesting because you think about a lot of the conversations that happen, certainly in terms of like service development, fires don't come up that much. Like we talk a lot about like community resilience, or we talk about flooding or like logistics and things, but it's just interesting that like this sort of the bulk of what we do is kind of isn't, well, I can only talk about like conversations with UKO, but people aren't talking about fires, even though statistically it's the biggest thing we do. Yeah.
All right, Neil, could I just clarify that? Just 95% of what we do in Northern Ireland comes through the fire and rescue service, and it's not all necessarily fires as such. So there could be other things. So we would still have calls relating to flooding, which would come through our contacts in the fire service, or severe weather. It's just a link. So about 95% of what we do comes through the fire service, but not all fires. I wouldn't like to think we're doing 95% of fires.
Okay. What percentage of fires would you say of that if there is?
Yeah, maybe close to 60%. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Good. I'm glad you were here for us to misquote you. Good. Okay.
It's still worth noting that often I can hear the term bread and butter be applied to fire service work, domestic house fires. At the heart of the point still exists, I think, somewhere.
Did you want to chat about this point, Tom?
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of stats, this one's remarkable, and I don't think it'll shock anyone. Emergency food services, which is something we've mainly been doing due to COVID, and that's because of the issue of people getting hold of food, vulnerable people. 88% of what we've done for food in the last 3 years, from 2017, has been 2020, which just shows where the weight is entirely within COVID. I don't think that will shock anyone. And those that are working within ER and CR will know how much of our time and energy has been put into supporting that need within our communities since COVID kicked off. And I think just because it's come around because of COVID doesn't mean it should be isolated from our other services as such. We still need to make sure we look at it for what it is. It's a service we're providing, and it fits within our overall ER offer.
I'm just conscious of time. So these last couple of points was come off a few conversations of the amount of like administrative burden that like some frontline teams are under in terms of like reporting or like meetings. And one person referred to it as like feeding the beast. And actually a lot of this administrative burden does detract away from some of the services we've described. And so it's kind of taking us on to this next point, which is like at the moment our systems now are kind of like the documentation is the doing. It seems like there's a huge amount of work involved in just documenting the actual stuff we've done. Whereas in the future, perhaps talking about sort of how we're going to focus like tech and design, like should we have systems that like just using them for the actual job does the documentation in of itself? So that's kind of like a thing we've learned as well. And I guess it's a sort of philosophical thing. Technology should be freeing us up to do the stuff humans are really good at, sort of speaking to the earlier points that Tom was talking about, the humanitarian bit. So yeah, we've kind of been thinking about that. So next steps, those aren't coming up, which is fun.
I can recall them if you'd like.
Yeah.
So we're doing more interviews, still got more staff to get through and external partners to get through. We've got more stats to add into the live document we're working on, which we think will add a layer of richness to the information and will be really eye-opening, I think. And then engaging our volunteer teams with the work we're doing as well. So making sure they're aware and they've got a chance to contribute. And of course, as we get these insights and more information from our interviews, it will help us more articulately define our services better on that document as well.
Thanks. Well, yeah, that's it for this for us showing things. If any people do have like 5 minutes and they want to carry on chatting, or you want to have a break between that and your next thing you might have at 4 o'clock. But
there's a really interesting point in there from Charlotte, and I don't know whether or not we can pick this up separately, but we have new phones on the vehicles to help with admin of paperwork in ER, which might help reduce the beats.
Beast, sorry, bad type.
Beast.
The beast.
Nice. Got you. Have you got a couple of minutes you could chat about how has that sort of come about, I guess? Like what new phones are you using and what are you using them for?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't actually used them yet because I haven't been on a call since they've gone, but I do know they've been installed. And the idea is that before, normally what happens is we, in an incident, we take a continuous log of what's going on. And then we'd before then taken that and either scanned it ourselves personally and then like got rid of it, or delivered it personally to Kathy, who would then have uploaded it into all the systems and logged it. Now we finish the incident, we take a picture of it, the camera sends a picture straight to Kathy, and that just eliminates like 3 steps. It's still involved for uploading it, but there's a few steps taken out of that.
Cool.
I think that was a good addition.
It'd be great to find out a bit more about that.
Kathy has been on some of these calls, so she might not be able to make it today, but could be worth. She's on your mail.
Maybe we chat to Kathy.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And the other thing to mention as well, sorry, I just put in the chat as well, but it's just like how closely our teams relate to flooding teams, like where flooding regions are, because I know that the research we're doing in community is 2 flood-prone areas, and we don't have teams. I just wondered like whether we respond more to fires because that's where we have teams that are more relevant to the incidents. Not always, obviously, but I just wonder like what's the correlation in different areas.
There's a couple of comments about technology on devices. So there's obviously this paperwork element. Is there anything, and not much love for Lenovo, unfortunately. Glad we don't have any shares there. is there anything, obviously we've talked about paperwork, is there anything else that you'd want a tablet device to do? Like what would you need that for? I'm interested in Paul or Rachel if there's any reflections.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Go Paul.
Definitely.
Okay.
We've been talking about if CRCC had a database nationwide of all the numbers, services, etc. for every area, then borderless mobilizing could be a possibility. You could pull it up on your tablet from CRCC, hold the database. You pull it up, I go into Berkshire Buckinghamshire from Northampton, and I know who the housing officer, who social services are, because it's all there, not on paper, not on little booklets, but online that I can access directly. When CRCC send me somewhere else, they can give me the link, bang, I'm in. We are living in the 18th century, never mind the 21st.
Thanks, Paul. That's super helpful. Rachel, did you have something you wanted to follow up with that?
I need to say amen. No, but also not just that, but I think the whole instant management side of things. So not just so that sort of almost what we used to call the fire packs or the flood packs in electronic form and national, but having local information on there, I think would just be amazing. We've talked about it lots of times. We've got started on it lots of times, but it's one of those things that always gets pushed back due to sourcing, which is really understandable, particularly when you have a year like this year. But I think it could go wider than that in that if we had a sort of incident management system whereby volunteers on scene could be almost checking in on the tablet, so it saves some of those phone calls to the CRCC. CRCC know that you're safe and can and that information then logs into the incident management system. We know how long a volunteer's been on scene. We know what hours people are doing. We know when they last checked in. We can look at what's happening on the ground. They can record information like that. And I don't mean that should cut out the phone calls to the CRCC. But I think these are really, really important in terms of oversight and having that open conversation and having some more sort of, I guess, objective advice when from somebody who's not on the scene. But there's a lot of that kind of admin work from volunteers having to pick up the phone, go and find signal half the time as well, if it's anything like around here, and it just sort of saves some of that time so you can focus on the service users in front of you. And then from a sort of management perspective, the duty managers, the CR team, the CRCC can see how an incident is progressing and then respond to that and say, look, there's actually lots of people there that need support. Perhaps we need another team. We can deploy that. So the whole kind of wider piece, having it all feed in, and it would also update BRM, so we don't have to do that. And then everybody can have more hair.
Rachel, everybody, can I just ask, did anybody consider mobile Wi-Fi on the new RU1s when they were developed? Are they hotspots or not?
I wasn't on the fleet group. Was anyone on the fleet group?
Does anybody know if they are mobile Wi-Fi hotspots?
No. Yeah, I'm on the fleet group. No, not that on the RU. I'm not sure with the RU1s, but definitely not on the RU2s. But I don't think so. Don't think it was one of the things on the RU1s. Not that I recall.
As I said, 18th century, not 21st.
So we are now
sorry,
at 4.
I've got to go on to the meeting now. Bye.
Yep, I think it's a good point to wrap up. So
thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. We'll get the recording up onto YouTube, get it sent out later. As always, fire in some comments or emails, whichever works for you, and so we can keep addressing them. And yeah, see you next week.
Bye, everyone.